Hello everyone, welcome to our channel. In today's video, we're going to explore why Cliff Richard disappeared from the spotlight. I like this story because I know one thing for sure: if you get married, you have to commit to your partner. Cliff Richard was in love with a woman for 50 years. But she married his best friend instead of him, then later married someone else and eventually died in his arms. He never got married or had children. He just kept singing, all while hiding one of the greatest heartbreaks in British music history. When the police raided his home in 2014, it wasn't the first time his life had been shattered. The BBC had signed a secret agreement. The accusations were false, but the damage was real. He lost weight, developed shingles, and couldn't sleep. He said his home felt defiled. The man who once filled Wembley Stadium was now afraid to even leave his house. Leave a comment with the number 1 and join us as we dive into the story of Cliff Richard. On October 14, 1940, at King George Hospital in Lucknow, British India, Harry Roger Webb was born into a world shaken by war and revolution. World War II was raging, and India's independence protests were growing increasingly intense. In 1946, riots broke out during the Direct Action Day, and British families began leaving the colony. The Webb family was no exception. Harry's father worked in the colonial system, but by 1948, it was clear the empire was collapsing. They didn't leave by car or plane, but on a crowded ship crossing the Indian Ocean. The SS franchise was their lifeline. For 3 long weeks, the ship carried hundreds of British families away from the only home they had ever known. They went from being servants under the sun to living through food rationing and gray skies in England. England was cold still, recovering from the war. The Webb family moved into a small house in Carshalton, Surrey. The spacious rooms and warm evenings were all gone. It was a tough beginning for a boy who had once lived in comfort, but it also shaped him. That journey planted in Harry a deep desire to prove himself, to become something greater in this strange new life. And then Harry Webb disappeared. A man named Harry Greatorex was watching him. He was a talent manager with an eye for trends. He said to Harry, "You need a name that sounds like rock and roll." Cliff, he suggested, strong British, steady as a cliff. Then add Richard to honor Little Richard, the wild American rock star. Harry Webb disappeared and Cliff Richard was born. He didn't just change his name, he changed the face of British music. On August 29, 1958, a song called "Move It" was released. It sounded raw, loud, and rebellious, completely different from the polite, gentle pop music of the time. Cliff was just 18 years old. The song climbed to number 2 on the UK charts and caused a sensation. For the first time, British teenagers had their own rock and roll star. He didn't copy America. He created something new. Just that one song opened the door for everyone who followed the Beatles, the Rolling Stones, and many more. But it wasn't just the music. It was the frenzy. When Cliff toured that same year, England went wild. Girls screamed, cried, and fainted. The boys hated him for stealing the spotlight. The security guards couldn't control the crowds. It was Elvis-level chaos. But this was London, Manchester, and Leeds. Nothing like this had ever happened here before. They called it the Cliff Fever. The press loved it, and so did the record labels. In 1959, the frenzy doubled when Cliff released Living Doll. He didn't really want to sing the song because he thought it was too soft and fake. "I hated it," he told the producer. But the band turned the song into a slow country-style ballad. It hit number 1, stayed there for 6 weeks, and sold 770,000 copies. He received a silver record in November, then a gold one in January. Next came Travelin' Light, which also hit #1 and stayed there for another 5 weeks. Those two songs sold over 1 million copies, something no one in England had ever done before. Hollywood took notice. In 1959, Cliff starred in the film Serious Charge, a dark, serious movie about homosexuality, false accusations, and heavy moral issues. He was only 19 years old, and his taking the role shocked everyone. A year later, he starred in Espresso Bongo, a satirical film about the music industry. With these roles, Cliff proved he was more than just a teen idol. He wanted to act to grow to be more than a singer. Before that, British pop stars had never done that. Then came Summer Holiday. On January 10, 1963, the film premiered in London with 3,000 fans crowding into Leicester Square. Cliff couldn't get out of the car. That night he missed his own private screening, but it didn't matter. The soundtrack had already climbed to #1 on the UK album charts before the film was released nationwide. It stayed at #1 for 14 straight weeks. Many songs from the film hit #1 the next time Bachelor Boy's Summer Holiday, and even the instrumental track Foot Tapper by The Shadows topped the charts. The film was the biggest box office hit in the UK in 1963, second only to From Russia with Love. That same year, Cliff was voted Britain's favorite movie star. Then the Beatles arrived. Most thought Cliff would be pushed aside. But in 1964, during the height of Beatlemania, Cliff released 6 songs that made the top 10, while the Beatles had only 5. Songs like Constantly on the Beach and I Could Easily Fall in Love with You helped him hold his ground. Even as the Beatles were revolutionizing music and breaking into the American market, Cliff held his ground at home. It was a real battle. His film, Summer Holiday, and the Beatles' A Hard Day's Night competed fiercely in cinemas across the country. Both broke records, but British audiences hadn't forgotten the one who came first. Even Paul McCartney admitted that the Beatles went to Hamburg because Cliff had already taken over England. John Lennon was also blunt before Cliff Richard and Move It. There was nothing worth listening to in England. In 1965, a surprise happened. The New Musical Express magazine held a global poll asking readers to choose the world's best male singer. Cliff beat Elvis, Lennon, and McCartney. That year, the Beatles released Help and Rubber Soul. Elvis was still selling out shows, but Cliff came out on top. Why? Because even as the world changed, Cliff kept evolving. He didn't try to imitate the Beatles or chase trends. He balanced pop ballads, faith family-friendly films, and genuine charm. He was always consistent. And to fans around the world, that mattered. He was their rock before and after the British invasion wave. In June 1966, an unexpected event took place. At Earl's Court, Cliff Richard stepped onto the stage not to sing, but to stand alongside American evangelist Billy Graham, telling thousands of people that he had become a Christian. This was not a quiet, personal decision. It was a powerful public declaration broadcast nationwide. Fans who had seen him as the British Elvis or Little Richard were stunned. Some cried, some stood frozen. The person they loved, known for his rebellious image, had changed in a way no one expected. But this moment wasn't accidental. It marked the end of a spiritual journey that had begun 2 years earlier. Making it public during the swinging 60s cultural era gave undeniable weight to his seriousness. Rock stars back then weren't supposed to talk about God. They had to rebel, break boundaries, and break the rules. Cliff's declaration went against every cultural expectation of a pop icon. Instantly, many people panicked. Some fans thought his music career was over. Within the industry, rumors spread that he would quit singing and become a teacher. That idea wasn't far-fetched. Cliff himself once wondered if he could truly be a Christian and still stand on stage. Music magazines began speculating about who would replace him. Booking agents pulled out. The industry believed it was impossible to live by faith and be a star. For a while, Cliff wasn't sure either. But then everything changed. He didn't disappear. He continued down his new path. And in doing so, he created something entirely new. He didn't give up his faith, nor did he abandon music. Instead, he found a way to combine both. He became Britain's first major pop star to openly live his faith while still holding a place on the charts. No one had done that before. He proved you don't have to choose between the two. You can be true to your beliefs and still fill concert halls. This choice not only helped him survive his career, but also changed who he was. Cliff admitted that his rock and roll image used to be fake. He wasn't confident, he was just pretending. But after becoming a Christian, everything changed. He said, "My confidence grew, my attitude changed. It didn't matter to always be right. The pressure to play a role disappeared. I felt free to be myself." My attitude changed. It didn't matter to always be right anymore. The pressure to play a role disappeared. I felt free to be myself. This new confidence helped him perform better even as the Beatles and the Merseybeat bands dominated the charts. While others struggled to keep up, Cliff grew stronger because finally he felt like himself. But by the mid-70s, Cliff's career hit a rough patch. In 1975, for the first time, he didn't have a single song on the charts. People began to think his time was over. Then Devil Woman was released in April 1976. The song had a powerful, sharp, and darker sound than anything he had done before. It told a strange story about a prophet, a curse, and a wild cat. But more importantly, it really rocked. The song reached number 9 in the UK and number 6 in the US, marking his first top 10 hit in America. It sold over 2 million copies. Cliff John Trolai, Gio Gai Sok Hon Nua La Gioi Hard Rock Jan John Hanong. Jimmy Page, Eric Clapton, Va Elton John Jiu Juoch Nhin Thai Jeo Hui Hiu. I'm Nearly Famous. Ung Ho album Trolai Kua Ong. Jai La Nhung Huyen. Thoai Guitar the Hien, Suton Trong Kong Kai Joy Voi Moten Goi Tong Bisem La, Sach Se Loi Toi. Moten Haf Bin Am Nhak Kon Sosan album Moi Kua. Cliff Voi Nhung Tak Pham Shuat Sak Nhat Kua, Marvin Gaye. This was not just a comeback, but a complete transformation. The boy from the 50s was now celebrated as a serious rock artist. He didn't stop there. In 1987, after more than 25 years in his career, Cliff released Always Guaranteed, a modern pop album that steered clear of the cheap synth sounds of the decade and sounded very contemporary. Inspired by Thriller, he teamed up again with Alan Tarney. The result was a platinum-selling album that reached number 5 in the UK, stayed on the charts for 24 weeks, and sold over 1.3 million copies. 4 singles from the album made the UK Top 40, with some even earning silver certification, 250,000 copies. Cliff proved that even in the late 80s, he could still compete with top stars. Then at Christmas 1988, Cliff released Mistletoe and Wine, a gentle, faith-filled holiday song. He recorded it along with tinsel hanging over the mic in the middle of summer. The single debuted at number 7, then soared to number 1, holding the top spot for 4 consecutive weeks. The song sold 750,000 copies in 6 weeks and became the best-selling single of the year in the UK, outselling U2 Kylie Minogue and Phil Collins. By 2024, the song had been certified platinum and continued to earn $100,000 in royalties annually. Even after decades, people still love this song. But one of the most memorable moments came in May 1989 when Cliff released the 100th single of his career. No other British artist had ever done that before. To mark the special occasion, he invited 2,000 fans to the London Palladium. He performed 6 previously unreleased songs and asked them to vote for their favorite. The runner-up song was The Best of Me, which he also chose to release. It reached number 2 in the UK and was certified silver, while also charting internationally number 2 in Ireland, 25 in New Zealand, and 59 in Australia. It wasn't just about hitting the milestone of 100 singles, but about staying relevant in a constantly changing industry. Cliff Richard's concert at Wembley Stadium in June 1989 was more than just a show. They called it an event, and it truly lived up to that name. Wembley was packed to the brim. Thousands of fans gathered to witness something beyond music, a living time machine. Do you enjoy Cliff Richard's story? If yes, leave a comment with the number 2. If not, leave a 5. The first part of the concert took the audience back to the 1950s, with Cliff reminiscing about the TV show Oh Boy, the very program that launched his career in 1958. Cliff didn't perform alone. He also invited the Vernon's Girls Dallas Boys and the Kalin Twins bands that once ruled British rock and roll. For the fans in the crowd, it felt like stepping into a living jukebox. The second part of the concert showcased why Cliff was more than just a nostalgic artist. He performed newer songs with the confidence of someone who had conquered the charts for decades. The entire performance was filmed and later released as a live album and a special TV program. It wasn't just a concert, it was a carefully staged, historic moment. Knebworth Park, Hotro Nordhoff Robins Music Therapy Charity. By that time, he had released 100 singles with 65 reaching the top 10 and 14 hitting number 1, an unmatched record. A year later, on June 30th, 1990, another big moment arrived, a charity concert at Knebworth Park in support of the Nordhoff Robins Music Therapy Charity. Cliff performed with the Shadows, but he was just one part of a legendary lineup that included Paul McCartney, Elton John, Pink Floyd, Eric Clapton, Genesis, and Phil Collins. Rain fell as Tears for Fears opened the show, but the crowd stood still in the rain singing along. Cliff stood alongside some of the biggest names in rock and once again proved he deserved to be there. By December 1990, a new song was playing on the Radio Savior's Day. The song was written in October 1989 by Chris Eaton, who introduced it to Cliff at a Christmas party in a Rolls-Royce. Cliff listened to the demo right there in the car and said, "This is going to be number 1." He was right. The song debuted at number 6 on December 8th, then climbed to number 3, then number 2. And by December 23, it reached the top spot, knocking Ice Ice Baby off the throne. The video was filmed at DL Condor and Swanage on a sunny September day, showing people in winter clothes sweating as if they were pretending to celebrate Christmas. The result was truly magical. The wave of success didn't stop. Around the same time, Cliff released the album Private Collection 1979-1988, a compilation of his biggest hits. The album sold over 1.2 million copies, went multi-platinum, and became the biggest album of his career. Songs like We Don't Talk Anymore sold nearly 5 million copies worldwide, making his name resonate on every radio station across the UK. This wasn't just nostalgia, he also outpaced new pop stars and led in a rapidly changing industry. Then came a strange turning point. In 1999, Cliff released the song Millennium Prayer. Mainstream radio didn't like the song. BBC Radio 2 refused to play it. They said the song lacked broad appeal, even though they still played music by Tina Turner and Cher, who were about the same age as Cliff. Radio 1 had stopped playing older artists like the Beatles. Chris Evans from Virgin Radio once said Cliff was too old to be played. DJs had to get special permission just to air the song. Fans were outraged. Cliff's fan club even protested outside the BBC headquarters. The industry seemed to turn its back on him. But then a miracle happened. With no major record label, no airplay, and no machine backing him, Millennium Prayer still climbed to #1, not just for 1 week, but for 3 consecutive weeks, from November 28th to December 19th, 1999. That was his 14th #1 in the UK, coming 40 years after his first hit. Fans bought plenty of copies. Churches showed their support too. This wasn't just a hit, it was a protest. Cliff had beaten the system, and not just in the UK. In Australia and New Zealand, the song reached #2. In Europe, it made the top 20 in several countries. Three countries awarded platinum certification to the song. No major radio play, no heavy promotion, just people believing in the song. The song also raised significant funds for the children's charity Promised Charity. Cliff proved that you can hold on to your faith, raise money, and still top the charts. Olivia fought breast cancer for 30 years. She was a warrior, but she never let her pain show. When she passed away on August 8, 2022, Cliff was heartbroken. "I hate that word," he said, referring to her death. Instead, he said she simply stopped living. That was how he coped with the silence she left behind. On August 14, 2014, Cliff Richard was relaxing at his home in Portugal when he turned on the TV and saw a scene that made his heart stop live on air. A helicopter was circling his house in Berkshire while police were searching through his personal belongings. His first thought was simple but terrifying. They looked like thieves. But this wasn't a burglary. It was a police raid broadcast live worldwide thanks to a secret deal between the BBC and South Yorkshire Police. The BBC had advance notice. They even internally called it a money shot. They wanted drama. And they got it. Meanwhile, Cliff Richard was devastated. At 77 years old, he was a national icon with a clean record and decades of dedication to the music world. Now he was collapsed on his kitchen floor, crying uncontrollably. The images appeared everywhere, from the UK to Australia. During the trial, Cliff broke down in tears as he read the list of countries that had broadcast the destruction of his private life. He later said the stress made him feel like he was about to have a heart attack or stroke. It all started with an accusation. A man in his 40s claimed that in 1985, Cliff had assaulted him at a Billy Graham event at Bramall Lane Stadium. The event was no small affair. Over 5 nights, up to 200,000 people attended. Cliff had taken the stage alongside Graham, supporting the Christian movement he had been part of since 1966. The allegations quickly fell apart. The man described a room with gym equipment where the assault supposedly happened. The problem was that room didn't exist in 1985, and the gym equipment was stored somewhere completely different. However, the police pursued the case for 22 months. They ignored the testimonies of the officers assigned to protect Cliff that night, officers who were with him the entire time and weren't even questioned. The investigation lasted nearly 2 years, costing taxpayers $800,000, but didn't lead to any charges. Nothing at all. But the damage had already been done. As if the live raid and media headlines weren't enough, the BBC even submitted the footage for the Most Shocking News Story of the Year award. That's right. While Cliff was still under investigation, the broadcaster used the raid footage as an entry. That decision later cost the BBC an additional $20,000 in damages. The court called their actions arrogant and disgraceful. Behind the scenes, the human toll continued to grow. Cliff later revealed that he fell into depression. Some days he couldn't sleep, on others he couldn't move his hands. He developed shingles, lost weight, and collapsed from exhaustion. He said it felt like his home had been contaminated, and he no longer felt safe in his own house. Simple things like releasing an album or promoting a book became impossible. Everything came to a halt because the world no longer saw him as a person, but as a news story. And then one of the strangest moments happened. Right after the raid was broadcast, a man tried to blackmail Cliff. He demanded money and threatened to spread lies if he wasn't paid. The man was arrested, but strangely enough, the original sexual abuse allegation was still taken seriously in the investigation. So the person who tried to blackmail Cliff using the raid was treated as a credible victim. In the end, Cliff received $400,000 in compensation from South Yorkshire Police, who admitted that their advance notice to the BBC was illegal. They issued a public apology, an apology that couldn't erase the damage, just as the multi-million-dollar compensation couldn't fully make up for it. And they spent nearly $2 million more on legal costs, in addition to the compensation. But Cliff was still not satisfied with how the prosecutor described their decision. The CPS said there wasn't enough evidence to charge him, but for Cliff that wasn't enough. He wanted it made public that there was no evidence, not a single piece. The suggestion that something might still be out there is what haunted him the most. He said, "I feel defamed not by the police, but by the BBC." In court, he again broke down in tears, talking about the fear of being forever branded, even after being cleared despite doing nothing wrong. He told lawmakers that having his name made public had ruined the way he looked people in the eye, that no matter what the damage was done, and people would always have doubts. He had every reason to feel that way. His name was plastered all over front pages, his face shown, while police gathered evidence that ultimately meant nothing. His entire life was reduced to just a raid, a rumor, and a media spectacle. In July 2018, he won his lawsuit against the BBC. The judge ruled that Cliff had a reasonable expectation of privacy, and the BBC had seriously violated that right by sensationalizing the coverage. That ruling changed how the British media reported on police investigations from then on. But for Cliff, it was never just about winning or losing. It was a matter of survival. A way to tell the world that what happened to him was not only unfair, but inhumane. He could never get back the 2 years of his life that were lost. He couldn't erase the headlines, the stares, or the feeling that no matter how clean his name was, a shadow always followed him. Thank you for watching the entire video. What do you think about Cliff Richard and what he went through? Please leave your comments below and let us know your thoughts, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any exciting videos. See you in the next ones.